What I'm going to be talking about today is the power of rest and the ways work and rest support and sustain each other, and how we as individuals and how leaders and how companies can better practice it. And this is something that's been the subject of my last 3 books, which have been related to work, about how we think about and use technology, about the hidden role of rest in the lives of really creative people, and most recently, the global movement to shorten the work week. And I've had an interest in work and in the future of work for quite a long time. My own academic training is in the history of science and technology. And for the past 20 or so years, I've worked as a futurist and a consultant. And in my work, I try to understand how people and technology and ideas work together to shape the world and define our vision of what is possible. A lot of that involves trying to dive kind of underneath the surface of things to show readers, to show clients that what seems natural and inevitable, whether it's the shape of technologies, the way we run our businesses, or how we think about work, actually has a history and can be changed. And one of the things that seems most natural and inevitable today is overwork. Right? The growing precariousness of work, the erosion of traditional career paths and job security, the narrow window that we have to become successes, all of this collides with the idea that we should express passion for our work through ever longer working hours. And as a result, a century-long decline in working hours has now come to a virtual halt. So as this chart shows, in 1870, the average American worked more than 3,000 hours a year. 100 years later, those hours had fallen by more than a third. But since then, they've hardly fallen at all. And in the last decade, in fact, they've started gently to go back up. And this has real consequences for people and economies. Overwork is now common in many developed countries. And as a result, burnout has become a public health crisis in the developed world, leading to shortened careers, lower national productivity, and worse physical and mental health. But actually, a century of research shows us that overwork is counterproductive for both individuals and organizations. In World War I, scientists observed that factories that worked long periods of overtime boosted output only for a few weeks, then actually became less productive than factories working normal hours, as they struggled with higher absenteeism or sickness or accidents or production errors. And since then, studies of professionals, police, pilots, and others have confirmed those findings. We assume that we can increase our productivity by working longer hours, but it turns out that chronic overwork is actually less effective than steady, regular hours. Now, you might think that scientists and artists and musicians who have reputations for being obsessed about their work would also work obsessively. But others learn to harness what I call deliberate rest, which are periods of rest that balance intensive work, give them time to recover, and let their creative subconscious explore new ideas and generate new insights. And that begins with how they design their work days. Now, most of us think of the workday as something like this. It starts maybe at 9 a.m., it ends at 5, and we treat all that time as more or less equivalent. We don't schedule time for rest during the day, and if we need to be more productive, we stretch out those hours, coming in early or working late. But in reality, our energy levels, our capacity to focus and pay attention, they all rise and fall rather dramatically during the day. We're generally at an energy and attention high in the late morning, and then that falls off after lunch, and then we revive a little bit in the afternoon. And so here's what the daily schedules of highly creative people look like. They're actually tuned to this rhythm of rise and fall in energy and attention. First of all, for them, the day starts much earlier, often around 6 o'clock in the morning or so. Second, the balance of work and rest is completely different. They work very intensively for about 4 or 5 hours, then immediately have a long break away from their work, and then they do a little bit more in the afternoon. And that period of 4 or 5 hours is something that is observed in a number of different kinds of studies of creativity and work. For example, in Malcolm Gladwell's work, where he talks about the 10,000 hours rule, he argues that it takes an average of 10,000 hours to become world class at something. And that number actually comes from a study of violin students by a sociologist named Anders Ericsson, who argued that world-class performers needed what he called deliberate practice to become really great. But that was 10,000 hours over 10 years, or about 1,000 hours per year. So if you assume people took weekends and went on vacations, that meant that the very best students practiced about 250 days a year, which works out to about 4 hours a day. Now, Ericsson noted two other things that we usually overlook. First of all, top performers actually slept more than the average student because they took naps during the day. And second, they spent less time in leisure activities, but were more thoughtful about how they spent their time. In other words, just as they engaged in deliberate practice, they also engaged in deliberate rest. So world-class performance isn't just a matter of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice over a decade. It also requires 12,500 hours of deliberate rest and 30,000 hours of sleep. So psychologists and neuroscience research tell us that elite performers can operate at a high level for about 4 hours a day. And after that, productivity drops off quite substantially. So it's more effective to organize your time around those focused hours rather than to try to work very long hours. And that's what highly creative people why highly creative people adopt the schedules they do. Now, also, it turns out that our brains don't switch off when we do something mentally undemanding. The brain switches on what scientists call the default mode network, which activates connections between the memory and the creative centers of the brain. And after periods of intensive focus, the default mode actually continues working on unfinished problems and exploring new ideas, even as our conscious minds are diverted or they're at play. So this phenomenon of sort of your subconscious working on problems even when you're focused on something else is something that we experience every day. You know, if, for example, you're trying to remember the name of an actor who is in a movie and the TV show, and you just can't quite remember their name, and you go off and do something else, and a few minutes later, their name pops into your head. That's the default mode network at work. And it is working on our behalf all the time, but it's also something that we can learn to use better, something that we can train to operate sort of on our behalf on our hardest problems. And one way we can do that is through regular activities like long walks and exercise and vacations, which provide time for the creative subconscious to explore new ideas, to work on unsolved problems, and to come up with novel solutions. And the more we make a routine of it, the better our minds get at using this time. So creative people structure their days to do their most important work when they're most energetic and creative. They prioritize intensity of focus over length of time. They layer work and rest in order to have more time for recovery and to give themselves a creative boost. And as a result, they also have longer, more sustainable careers. So that's their daily schedule. But if you pull back, you also see them doing other things to help make their creative lives more sustainable over the long run. And here, their practice, this ground, expands to include people who work in stressful or demanding or unpredictable jobs, people who don't have a lot of control over their working schedules, like doctors and nurses or police or executives, but who manage to do them without burning out. Now, one of the things that they do is they take sleep more seriously. They have better discipline around sleep schedules and habits, and where possible, they take naps during the day if they're tired. Another thing that they're good at is detaching from work on evenings and on weekends. They maintain strong boundaries between their working life and their personal life, and this lets them more fully recharge and have the energy necessary to take on Monday morning. They're also better than average about taking vacations. So long-term studies show that people who take regular vacations are in better health, are less prone to depression and to heart attacks, and live longer than people who don't take vacations. Vacations actually are also important for another reason. They're incubators for new ideas. 25% of startup founders say they get ideas for their new companies while on vacation. And my personal favorite example of this comes from Lin-Manuel Miranda. As he tells the story, he spent 7 years performing his first play called In the Heights before his wife finally convinced him to take a break. And they went on vacation for 2 weeks, and he took with him a copy of Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton. And Miranda said, as soon as I gave my mind a break, Hamilton jumped into it. And this has become one of the most popular musicals of probably the last 20 years in the United States. Now, finally, a surprising number of people who are really serious about their work, who are very ambitious, also have really serious hobbies. And it turns out that these are not just distractions, but rather they play an important role in helping them balance their lives. So, for example, Winston Churchill was an amateur painter and even wrote a short book about painting as a pastime. And these kinds of hobbies offer some of the same psychological rewards as their work, but in a different medium and without the frustrations of work. So Churchill talked about painting as being like politics. In both cases, you need a clear vision, you need to be strategic about your resources, and you need to act boldly. And Churchill also loved the fact that he was working with paint and images rather than words. But painting was also great because while he was painting, he didn't have the Labor Party standing behind him trying to paint over everything he did. And he could finish a painting in an afternoon. Getting an agenda, a new law passed was something that could take months. And so it turns out that high achievers in a variety of fields are actually discovering that rest is essential for physical recovery, that it improves learning and concentration, and it improves performance. So, for example, elite athletes now take rest very seriously. And this started in the 1990s when Manchester United hired the first sleep coach to teach players how to sleep better, fight jet lag, and balance intensive workouts with periods of recovery. Manchester went on to become one of the most dominant teams in the history of the sport. Now, since then, athletes around the world have adopted these methods. And in the United States, for example, it's so common for professional basketball players to take long naps between morning practice and evening games. They call those several hours NBA nap time. International pilots are now required to rest during long flights because psychologists have found that fatigue greatly affects attentiveness, reaction times, and problem-solving abilities, all of which you want to be at their best when you're landing, a 747 after a 12-hour flight. And you can get a sense of how much attitudes have shifted on this subject by comparing the new generation of planes with the B-2 bomber, which went into operation in the 1990s. And the B-2 flies missions up to 32 hours nonstop, but the designers of the plane never thought to build in space for the pilots to sleep. They actually had to buy lawn chairs that they fold out behind them in order to take a nap. Also, on some US Navy ships, executive officers have designed watch schedules that work with sailors' circadian rhythms, allowing them to get better rest in their off hours and keeping them more alert and focused when they're on watch. So these are all examples of places that are very demanding, that require high levels of performance, that are discovering ways of designing their days, designing rest so as to better support work, to help people be sort of more productive, and to help give people more time for recovery. And companies and thoughtful leaders are also finding ways of giving people more opportunities to rest. So some of them install nap pods like the one seen here at the Hbr corporate headquarters in Copenhagen in Denmark. These are specially designed chairs that allow users to take short restorative naps. And a growing movement of companies are creating time for rest by moving to 4-day weeks or 6-hour days or other kinds of shorter work weeks. And they're doing this without reducing productivity or cutting salaries. And this is a global movement. It includes companies in Korea, in Japan, Australia, New Zealand, North and South America, and Europe, and also now Latin America. It's also quite diverse. It includes big software companies, design firms, and other professional service firms, but also manufacturers, factories, care homes, call centers, and even restaurants. So it's not just a movement that benefits engineers and product designers. It also improves the lives of line chefs and baristas and nurses and mechanics. It also benefits leaders who worked long hours in their youth and now think they can find better ways of working, be more creative, and make overwork obsolete. So how do they go about shortening the work week? Well, first of all, mobile devices, networks, cloud services, other technologies have dramatically increased our capacity, our productivity, but meetings, distractions, multitasking, and bad processes have also conspired to erode our productivity. In fact, all of those together, according to recent studies, can take up as much as 2 hours of productive time every day. So in other words, as Bertrand Russell or John Maynard Keynes might have put it 100 years ago, the 4-day week is actually already here. It's just buried under inefficiencies and outmoded practices and unexamined habits. So what you do in order to do 5 days worth of work in 4 is first to deal with all of these issues. And that involves, first of all, shortening meetings. So weekly, hour-long, all-hands meetings get replaced with quick standing meetings or even shorter, smaller walking meetings. Meetings often also become simpler. For example, at e-commerce company Zozo in Japan, the CEO requires that people not give elaborate presentations, but just talk to him, like person to person. Second, companies figure out how to use technology more thoughtfully. They set aside a couple times a day to check email rather than let people be constantly interrupted by new messages. And they also think more about matching the right channel to different kinds of work and communication. They also automate everyday processes. At IIH Nordic, which is a design firm in Copenhagen, programmers are constantly coming up with tools to automate email replies, fill out forms, and handle other simple but time-consuming tasks. So companies also redesign the workday itself, carving out time for people to work without interruption. So for example, a design firm called Flock in England has a 6-hour day that they divide into red time for really serious deep work, yellow time for meetings and email, and green time for breaks and lunch. And by better dividing time, people often report having higher quality social time and better friendships, as well as being more productive. But those better quality friendships also help people be happier and a little bit more productive at work. So how successful is this strategy? Well, first of all, companies are able to be as profitable and productive as before. And this is true whether you're a restaurant, a repair shop, or a startup. At Microsoft Japan, for example, they experimented with a 4-day week last year. And during the month that they ran the trial, sales per employee were up almost 40%. Electricity use dropped by 1/4, and more than 90% of employees said that they were satisfied with the 4-day week. Another example is Pursuit Marketing, which is a call center in Glasgow, Scotland. And after 2 years, they reported that their productivity had gone up by 30%. Retention in an industry where job hopping, moving from company to company is a very common thing, had gone up to 98%, which is unheard of. And their revenues had more than doubled from £2 million to £5 million. People also become happier at work and become better collaborators and team members. So at Synergy Vision, which is a company in London, the percentage of people who said they were very happy at work before the 4-day week was implemented was about 12%. 6 months later, after they'd implemented a 4-day week, the percentage who said they were very happy had gone to more than 50%. And more people said they had time for hobbies, had good work-life balance. But there's also a really interesting number at the bottom of this chart. They asked people whether they felt they were able to keep up with work. During a 5-day week, 50% of people said that they were able to get everything done. 6 months later, though, nearly 80% said that they could get everything done. So even as working hours actually dropped, the feeling of control over your time, of being able to get your work done, actually rose very substantially. Now, in the last few months, companies have been moving to a 4-day week for another reason, the global pandemic. Now, this is a map of a Korean call center that had a COVID outbreak in February, and it illustrates with the blue chairs and desks just how quickly the virus is able to spread in an open office. And reducing the number of people in an office is one way to make it safer. There are also companies that have gone remote and then discovered that there were more productive places and that all their employees needed more time to juggle homeschooling or medical issues or other challenges from the pandemic. Nobody could play the ideal worker, the figure who can, always stay late, say yes to every request, and had no family conflicts any longer. Everybody in this world now needed help. Now, that doesn't mean that the change has to be permanent. So, for example, Shopify, which is an e-commerce company based in Canada, put people on 4-day weeks this summer when it saw that people were no longer taking vacations and that stress levels were rising. In Asia, Medtronic, which is a medical instrument and pacemaker manufacturer, challenged regional offices to meet quarterly production goals in exchange for being able to reduce working hours on Friday. And this summer, the Korean office became the first to win a half day on Friday, and they're now aiming to meet new goals to get down to a 4-day week. So, deliberate rest can help make people more creative, more productive, and more resilient. Resting well turns out to be a skill that we can learn and develop. Much as athletes and singers use their breath to increase their stamina or range, we can learn to layer work and rest in ways that help us recharge our batteries while increasing our potential to be creative and to solve problems. But while we need to take rest seriously, rest isn't just something that we can pursue on our own. Organizations benefit from it as well, and they benefit from supporting it in all their employees. So whether it's adjusting schedules to give people better breaks during the day, or helping them learn to use naps and downtime more strategically when on the road or working across time zones, or reducing working hours and giving people 3-day weekends, companies can push back against the culture of overwork, they can reduce burnout, and they can improve work-life balance. It also helps companies by forcing them to think hard about how they work and finding ways of working more effectively by shortening meetings, using technology better, and redesigning the workday. And it nudges company cultures, making them more experimental, more comfortable with uncertainty, more supportive of collaboration and honest communication, the kinds of things that lots of writers in the Harvard Business Review advocate for their readers. And it also makes them more resilient. And it encourages managers to develop a leadership style that's better suited to today's uncertain world. And finally, it shows us all that it's not necessary to respond to crises by just doing more, right? Pushing more onto people, doing more of what only kind of works, or doing things faster and just kind of hoping for the best. Big challenges create a huge need for big change. But as the people and companies I write about teach us, they also open up opportunities to change. And learning to practice deliberate rest immeasurably increases our capacity to adapt and to evolve, to do better work and be better workplaces, to become better people and better companies. So, thank you all very much for listening. So I hope this has been interesting. And I will turn things back over now to Jinso. Yes. And we will have some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. You've been to Korea, right?
I have a couple times, yes.
When was the last time you were here?
Last time was, I think, January of last year. So it was about 18 months ago or so.
18 months ago. Pre-COVID era, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. 지금부터 질문해 주시면 되는데요. 채팅에 남겨주셔도 좋고 아니면 손들기 이용해줘서 말씀하셔도 좋습니다. 뭐 한국어, 영어 다 괜찮고요. 질문해 주실 때까지 제가 먼저 궁금한 거 물어볼게요. First of all, while waiting for answers from our audience, I have some questions for you. Today, this morning, I read some news articles about some Korean companies such as Lotte or Samsung and NCSoft are introducing 4-day work week because of the COVID pandemic.
Right.
And sadly, some of them are cutting the salaries as well. I guess that's not the solutions you are proposing, right?
No, I mean, there certainly are there is a tradition with companies of reducing salary along with reducing working hours, but you know, and particularly, let's say during a recession, right? Or, you know, a factory that has overproduced and has too much inventory might slow things down. But really what I've been interested in is companies that are able to cut working hours while keeping productivity high and keeping salaries the same.
Okay, so could you tell us more about any tools or any tips that companies can use in order to maintain the high quality of the work while cutting the working hours?
Sure. Well, you know, of course, it varies a lot from industry to industry. But I think that the first thing to recognize is that, you know, that simply using the tools that we have at hand more effectively can do an awful lot to make us more productive as individuals and as companies. So I don't have a lot of stories of, you know, companies that adopt completely new technologies or, you know, new platforms and becoming, you know, sort of 4-day week companies that way. Generally what they do is that they get smarter about how they use the tools. In particular, they think about how you can reduce the amount of distraction in the office, how you can create periods of time when everybody has an opportunity at the same time to focus on their most important work. And that, you know, and sort of think about whether there are changes you can make within the office to support those things. So most of these companies have, you know, already have open offices, which are, you know, which can be, you know, great if you spend a lot of time working with other people, but they can also be kind of distracting. So, you know, one of them, for example, in order to encourage short meetings, has one set of, you know, very nice couches where they will entertain clients. And then for their own internal meetings, they have a little table and some uncomfortable chairs. And so it's just a kind of reminder, you know, nobody really likes them. And it's just a reminder to kind of keep things short. The other things that they will do are tools to help individual focus and to help with personal productivity. So I go into lots of these offices. I see noise canceling headphones everywhere. These things are, they are very, very popular. For those of you who in the software industry are familiar with a time technique called Pomodoro, which is one that involves working on code for 25-minute sprints and then taking 5-minute breaks. You use little egg timers to time yourself. So I see a lot of those in the office as well. But there are lots of little physical reminders or physical supports that help people, help recall how they're trying to work and provide some kind of visual cue or reminder or support for that. I guess the final really important thing is that the companies that do this best give workers plenty of autonomy to figure out how to make them, how to make this work. Nobody knows, even the best boss doesn't know everybody's job well enough to explain to them how to do it in, or 4 days rather than 5. You really need to let people figure that out for themselves. And if you can do that, then, people are capable of doing really great things.
Okay, thank you. And we have questions in the chatting window. The first one is from Miss Song Hui. And the question is that you have emphasized the time scale of the focus, and some people are morning person and some people are evening person. So everybody has a different lifestyle and different life cycle. Mm-hmm. So what if one is a night owl and one tends to focus in the evening time? Mm-hmm. Is it okay?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, there about 70% or so of people are either morning people or kind of mid-morning, kind of peak in mid-morning. So there's, but certainly it's the case that there are different chronotypes, as they're called. I think that nobody yet has redesigned a workday to account for both, night owls and early birds, as we call them. I think partly because the gains to be made from just, carving out periods of focus time are so great right now that that's just a big win for companies. I think that there are some interesting things that we could do next in terms of designing workdays to more finely account for individual chronotypes. But however, I would also mention that there is some really interesting research about how creativity goes up when you work against your chronotype. So for example, I'm a night owl, right? In college, I never started homework before about 10 or 11 at night. And when I was working on one of my books, I realized, I've got kids, I've got a job, I can't possibly do that any longer. And so I started getting up super early to write, like 5 in the morning. And for the first few weeks, it was terrible. And it took me a while to get into it. But I discovered that there is a quality that your mind has in those early hours that is, you don't encounter it any other time of day. The closest that I can describe, the closest thing that I had experienced to it previously was a few days that I spent in a Buddhist monastery, getting up at, and you get up at 4 in the morning and chant for an hour. But there really is something about those early hours that is very powerful mentally. And there's some research that found that actually people who are night owls do better on creativity tests early in the morning than they do late at night. And likewise, people who are early birds do better on creativity tests late at night. So even if you think you're working against your chronotype, and if you, there still are ways that you can design or you can use that time to your advantage.
Thank you. And second question from Henry Park. If there's more naps tools other than nap chair you have shown in the presentation to implement to an already existing office space where there aren't much space to install new tools?
Yeah, so it used to, it used to be that there were that there were offices. It was a more common thing in ordinary offices for people to take naps after work, right? You had the pillow, and you would, and everyone would do it. There's certainly the nap chairs that I showed are very much the luxury version of of nap chairs. There are simpler and less expensive sort of versions of this. I also see in places like aircraft repair facilities. Some of them are lucky enough to have a really nice nap pod. Others will have like army cots or things that they will be able to kind of shove in the corner and pull out. I think that there are things like that. There are also, there's been a lot of design work around things like eye coverings that do a better job of blocking out light and encouraging, help, that are temperature control to help you relax. So even if you can't get away, these can help you do a better job of kind of closing off the rest of the world. The challenge with that is you've got to be in an office where it's perfectly okay to do that in public. And that's often where the real challenge is for lots of workplaces. If it's not something that your bosses think are in favor of, if it's not something that they do themselves, then it can be challenging for the rest of us to feel like we actually have permission to do it.
Yeah, bosses and managers should take a nap in the office.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
No, we used to do that. I would advocate bringing it back. It would be great for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, third question from Unju. The Korean firms are traditionally that we valued long hours and that unity. I mean, the sense that we are all together in this work, and under such circumstances that South Korea has a very strong organizational culture and values. What should we do first in order to move around the workplaces and reschedule our working hours?
Okay, that's a really, really terrific question. I mean, in shorter, I talk about how companies actually go about doing this step by step. And lots of them actually will use an approach very similar to design thinking, right? Where there's brainstorming, you prototype a bunch of ideas, you test them out. And in the book, I go through exactly how this works at a variety of different places. So I won't rehash that here, but I think that this question of long hours being an important part of a very strong culture, and in a way, long hours providing a sense of unity, a sense of common purpose, is a really interesting and important thing, because I think all over the world there are companies where that's or industries where that's the case, right? And one of the things when I was writing the book that I was looking for were companies from industries where that was the norm. So restaurants, software industry, software startups, design firms. These are all places where long hours are are just part of life. This is what you sign up for. And I think that one of the things that I hear is that what happens in companies that move to 4-day weeks is that they come to think differently about the value of time. So basically, what one founder said was that what I now believe is that anybody can sit in a chair for 12 hours a day. That doesn't impress me any longer. What really impresses me is someone who can really focus, who can concentrate, who can spend their time well, and can do in 6 hours what this other person needs 12 hours to do. So that ability to work quickly, to use your time well, that's what becomes a symbol of real professionalism, of real dedication to your craft, of real seriousness, rather than long hours. One of the interesting things when you let people, you give people the autonomy to figure out how to make shorter hours work, is that they have to work together in order to make shorter hours work. This isn't just about, me figuring out how to make myself more efficient at your expense. At all of these companies, continue to maintain very high standards. They have the same deadlines, the same productivity levels, and you can't achieve those if people are competing against each other in order to make themselves more productive. So what that means is that the quest for shorter hours itself all becomes another source of unity. It's a common thing that everyone has to join together and collaborate on. And so, rather than being something that, that has a negative effect on company culture, it turns out to have a very positive effect.
Thank you for the answer. And the next question is from Kyung-hee. I think this is an interesting question. If you're
These are all interesting questions.
Oh, yeah. They are all, yes. If you are an expert in your field, then you may be able to cut your working hours by yourself. But what if you are a junior employee or you are a fresh graduate? How can you do that?
That is actually, you know what? You're right. That is a really good question. It is definitely the case that more senior people are better able to do this, and often feel that they have the experience and the kind of professional confidence necessary to make it, or to really make it work. Someone who's been in a profession for, let's say, 10 or 15 years, they've seen a lot, they know how things work, they know what everyone does wrong, and maybe they feel like, if I just had the chance, I know how I could do this a lot better. And so for them, being in a company that takes on the challenge of moving to a 4-day week is really great, because it's an opportunity for them to use their expertise in a new way and to test whether, or to prove that they really actually can figure all this out. Now, for younger people, I think that there is a concern that you're not going to learn as much in a company that works a 4-day week, or that you're not going to be able to rise as fast in the company or in your profession. But but I think, and to be fair, I know of one company that actually, in which the young workers made a case for going back to a regular 5-day week, because they felt like they couldn't quite make it work for themselves. They liked the idea of having the extra time to themselves, but they just didn't feel like they could make it function. So there is, that is 1 out of 150 companies. So it's, however, I think most places do, in most places, it is the case that everybody is able to to figure this out together. It's also the case that for small companies, for startups, for example, being able to attract more experienced workers is one of the benefits of moving to a shorter work week. The idea, I think that that if you are a technology company, for example, and you are competing with with Samsung or LG or Google or Microsoft for talent, you can't offer the same kinds of big salaries or stock options, but there's a certain kind, there are some developers or other professionals who will find a 4-day week really appealing. And you will be able to get people at a level of professional expertise, a level of experience that you might not otherwise. So if there are special challenges with getting younger people to feel comfortable working a 4-day week, there also are advantages in terms of being able to attract and retain older, more senior employees.
So if you are a big company and you work for the HR training team, should we give more special training or special program for the junior employees?
That's a good question. I think that partly it depends on, I think that certainly one of the things you have to do is get them to think differently about time. We live in a world that sends so many signals that our dedication is measured by how many hours we work, or that sleep and rest are unimportant. We have in the States this saying, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And I think that there are, the world tells us over and over again that one of the ways we show our dedication, we show that we're professional, is by being able to work these really, really long hours. And I think that, that being explicit about a company culture that says, we don't value long hours, we value high levels of productivity, we value you being able to respect everybody else's time so that all of us can get out of here at the end of the day, Thursday, and have a 3-day weekend. That's what we value here. And I think you can be every bit as professional, every bit as dedicated, use every bit as much ingenuity making that work as you can, making a 50-hour week or 60-hour week work.
I think there's a more responsibility for individual workers, right?
Yeah, I think that while this is something that everybody does together, everybody is also responsible for contributing and making it a success. Yeah.
Okay. The next question from Mike Lee. I think this you have explained about this issue in your book, but again, I think this is a good question. Although 4-day working week has shown such outstanding results, it would be quite difficult to deploy since most of customers are still working 5 days. So what would be the biggest challenges to implement?
Right.
Is there any good reasons to convince the management?
So, okay. First of all, management benefits from a 4-day week or other kind of shorter work week every bit as much as employees. If you are working at a startup, for example, your founder is twice as likely to burn out, statistically, is twice as likely to burn out as you are, is 3 times as likely to have challenges with depression or other kinds of health issues. So they will really benefit from a shorter work week as well. Now, as for, okay, so what do you do if you are a retail company, for example? Or a government office? What a lot of them will do is, first of all, look at, let's say, their sales across a week, and ask themselves, is there a day that's actually pretty quiet? So Pursuit Marketing, which is the call center in Glasgow that I mentioned, they found they decided to go to a 4-day week when they realized that their people, okay, let me get this straight. That 90% of their employees made their weekly sales quotas by the end of the day Thursday. Mm-hmm. So, 90% of the money was coming in 4 days anyway. And so they figured if they could make those 4 days just a little bit more productive, then they could take the 5th day off. So, and I think that it turns out there are plenty of, there are some industries, some markets where it turns out that there is one day that really is kind of quiet. Mm-hmm. Public relations is a nice example of this, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody announces big news on Friday. Mm-hmm. If you've got
bad news,
bad news you get rid of on Fridays.
Yeah.
But if you've got a day like that, terrific. If you don't, what companies generally will do is they will go, is that you will either do shifts where, some people do Monday through Thursday, some people do Tuesday through Friday, or you will do, instead of do 4-day weeks, you might do 6-hour days and actually stay open longer. So so rather than being open for 8 hours a day, you're open for 12 hours. And I know some government offices, for example, that do this. And people really like it because, it feels like you're getting, like the government is more responsive. You can go in after work to pay your taxes or take care of other business. And depending on the kind of work you do, you can also be more productive. There are garages that have done this, and what it means, and when they stay open 12 hours a day, but have people on 6-hour shifts, the mechanics are able to work faster, they can work harder. And so what that means is that a job that might take 2 or 3 days at another garage can be done by the end of the day at this one. And customers naturally really like that. So there are ways actually of both reducing working hours for your employees while expanding availability for your customers that is a win-win for both.
So the following question from Henry Park is, which is better, the 4 straight days or 2 days and 2 days with a holiday in between?
Good question. There are people who are big fans of each one. The 4-day week, the 4 days and 3 days off is more popular right now. I think mainly because it's easier to sell your employees on the idea of having a 3-day weekend feels like a luxury. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that you get a 3-day weekend every week sounds like a really cool thing. Logistically, it's also often easier to work out, and Fridays are kind of the quiet day in your industry anyway. So that also supports a choice of sort of having 4 days straight and then 3 days off. There are a few companies that will do, let's say, Monday and Tuesday, take Wednesday off, and then work Thursday and Friday. And what they like is that you get a break in the middle of the week, and they feel like people don't lose momentum on projects in a way that they would if they were out of the office longer. But I think it's really a question of what your customers will put up with, and you just kind of experiment and see what you and your people like. So there's no definitive research yet that shows that one is absolutely superior to the other, or that one is much better under these particular conditions. Both of them seem to be good.
When I was in the 4th grade, I remember a girl next to me. She moved from France, and she was saying that she didn't go to school on Wednesdays in France. So she was shocked that we go to school every day. So back then we went to school for 6 days a week. So.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I remember I spent a couple years in Brazil. My dad was a professor of Latin American history, and they had half days on Saturday. And I was absolutely, I was shocked to discover, people having to go to school on Saturdays. It felt to me like absolutely the worst thing in the world. So.
Okay. Next question from Sugyong. Oh, there's a Monday sickness, right? So what if we take 3 days off in a row and we will feel much worse than we feel now on Mondays?
Right. The simple answer is that doesn't happen, or at least people don't report it happening. The reason is that a 3-day weekend basically gives you more time to rest and to recover. Here's what people do with their time. So you spend, let's say you've got Fridays off now. Friday is when you go to the doctor. It's when you run, you do your shopping, you make appointments, and then you have Saturday and, Sunday to relax, to spend time with family, to go to birthday parties, that kind of stuff. But having more time in which to rest and recover means that on Monday, you are better able to, you've got more energy to meet the day. People also do more volunteer work. Everybody reports spending more time with family. People also have more time for exercise and to cook better. Lots of people tell me that they, after a 4-day week, that they start losing weight because they're able to take better care of themselves. So for all of these reasons, it turns out that, that going back to work on Monday doesn't feel worse because you've got a 3-day week. It feels better.
Okay. Next question from Peter Han. 한창훈님 말씀해 주시겠어요?
들리시나요?
예, 들립니다.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, Alex, thank you for very insightful contents and your teaching. And it was a quite interesting one because most of the Koreans feel guilty when we are to take a rest, maybe. And what attracts me most was the concept of a deliberate rest. And I think this is very much connected to the previous question. So the reason why we sometimes say that after taking a lots of rest, we feel exhausted, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
That something's wrong,
Yeah.
which means we spent time in a little bit wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just taking a rest is taking a rest, but eat a junk food, which is not very good in terms of the taking a right kind of a rest. And like you said about the Pomodoro techniques, there would be lots of tools or ways to take a deliberate rest. So what I want to ask you is that what would be the proper, how can I say, tool or environment for each person or in the workplace? What would you recommend?
Okay, I'll answer it this way. I mean, I think that you're exactly right that your instinct that some kinds of rest are more restorative, they're better for you mentally or physically than other kinds. And we often think of rest as something that involves sitting on a couch, with the TV remote in one hand and, salty snacks in the other hand. But in fact, the kind of rest that is most restorative, that gives you the best break from work and also lets you recharge your batteries to the fullest extent, actually is much more active than that. So that's why things like serious hobbies, like exercise, going on walks, these things at first might not seem as restful, but in fact they do a better job of taking your mind off work and also giving you more physical energy than just sitting around. I think it's also, one of the reasons that very ambitious, very dedicated people like to have serious, really time-consuming, physically challenging hobbies is that those are the ones that do the best job of taking them out of their ordinary life. I talked to some CEOs who are really serious mountain climbers or rock climbers. And one of the things that they all say is you cannot, you can't worry about your, next quarter's growth numbers when you're 100 feet up on a granite cliff. And, you've got to think about your next handhold. The fact that you've got to concentrate absolutely on what's right in front of you is something that they really, really appreciate. So, but I think that, in the, that sort of for most of us during our regular working days, probably rock climbing is not something that we can do at our jobs, but even things like being able to, get out of the office for just, 10 or 15 minutes to be able to take a walk, to do something, a little physical, turns out to offer a really significant benefit, both in physical and in psychological terms. And the more you do that, the more regularly you do that, the better your mind and body become at extracting value out of that activity. The first couple times, you get kind of you get something out of it, but the regular practice is what really delivers value for you. So that's what, and then after that, you really got to experiment and figure out what works best for you. But, if you take it seriously and you make time for it, then, I think we all have the ability to discover the forms of rest that provide the best benefit for us, that make us feel best physically and mentally, and help us be better people at work and better people in our own lives.
네,
Thank you for
되셨나요?
the answer. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
And before taking more questions, I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Since the pandemic, many companies have introduced remote working, so-called working from home, right?
Right.
Including my own company, Hbr Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that the remote working is at odds with shorter working hours, because
Mm-hmm.
when I read your book, it seems that you are against the idea of working from home, because you have to be together for a shorter amount of time to be more productive and to be more focused on the work.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we balance the remote work and shorter working hours?
That's a great question. And I think that it's a different kind of challenge when you're the only person doing it, or when there are a small number of people in the company doing it, versus when everyone is doing it. Mm-hmm. So what researchers have found is that even in companies that have flexible work policies or work from home policies that look very good on paper, the people who take them often report, finding that they don't get promoted as quickly. They're not put on projects that are as good as before, because there's still a little lingering suspicion about whether, about how serious you are or how dedicated you are compared to the person who's still at their desk, until dinner time. I think now one of the potential positives of the pandemic and everyone working from home is that I think there are lots of managers who used to think of work from home as just, like easier than coming into the office, who realize with kids around, with other things, that's not the case, right? And I hope that the stigma around flexible work or remote work goes away, even as people start to come back into the office. There is still the challenge that, it's hard to maintain boundaries between your personal life and your work life if moving from work to home means going from this side of your couch to that side of your couch, right? I think we all struggle with the challenge of maintaining some kind of boundary between work life and home life these days. And I think that the places that I have seen that do the best job of this are very explicit and intentional about things like not requiring people to answer email in the evenings or during their downtime. And also they're good at starting and ending the day with some kind of ritual that, begins the workday and brings it to an end. So whether that's a quick meeting that has, like, it sounds kind of corny and very California, but like a moment of silence, or just, a few seconds of people doing deep breathing exercises. Even something as simple as that can help to mentally put boundaries around work time and personal time, and thus make it easier for people to maintain a balance between them. So, but I think that this is going to be an ongoing challenge. And I think that, and it will play out very differently depending on whether we continue to see flexible work as something, whether we take it seriously and whether we see it as, just as good as work in the office, and whether we as individuals and companies are able to develop sort of rituals and practices that allow us to build better boundaries between work time and non-work time.
Thank you. I guess this would be our last question for you. How many days do you work? And
So,
if there's any effective tools or principles that you want to share?
yeah, well, to be honest, I do everything I talk about in my books. So in my book, Rest, I talk about the value of naps, which I take almost every day. I'm also very serious about my own deep play, my own hobbies. So I have 2 dogs and I go walking with them an awful lot. We have, the Bay Area has wonderful bike trails and hiking trails, which I've come to know, which I spend plenty of time on. And then, to be honest, I tend not to work 4-day weeks, but I tend to work very intensively for more like, 5 or 6 days. So I'm still working fewer than 40 hours, but the fact that I have, clients or audiences sometime, in Korea right now, and then in about 8 hours, I'm going to be talking to a group in Zurich, Switzerland. So, the reality is that I have to do a certain amount of time shifting. Mm-hmm. It is, on the other hand, really wonderful that groups around the world are interested in shorter hours and in rest. So, and fortunately, I have the freedom to make up that time at other points in the day. So, I think that it's a rhythm that works for me. It's also very different from the way that I used to work. I used to be the kind of person who thought that, who very much believed that it was cool to be, the last guy in the office, the person who could brag about how many hours you'd worked. And I had to learn the hard way, as most of us do, that is, maybe cool when you're younger, or it gives you a certain feeling of accomplishment, but it gives you much more a feeling of accomplishment than actual accomplishment. And that as you become better at your work, one of the things you ought to be able to do is be more thoughtful and mindful and more effective in how you spend your time. And, it took me, 10 years to write my very first book. And in the last 10 years, doing all the things that, that I talk about in Distraction Addiction and Rest and Shorter. In the last 10 years, I have finished 3 books. So I think that, in my own life, the value of these practices, the value of thinking about your own time and how you spend it, those results speak for themselves.
Thank you very much.
All right.
It was great having you. Yeah.
Thank you. As I said, if anybody has other questions, please find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or by email. I am very happy to answer other questions that people have. So, as we say in California, hit me up.
오케이. 저희한테 메일을 주셔도 저희가 전달해 드릴 수 있으니까요. 한국말로 쓰실 분은 저희한테 주셔도 되겠습니다. Thank you for having your time with us. Everybody, please give a big applause to Alex Pang for heart. Okay.
Thank you. This is a real pleasure. All right. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Take care.
네, 여러분 저희도 그럼 다음에 뵙겠습니다. 오늘 업무 시간 중에 다 찾아주셔서 감사하고요. 다음 달에 또 세미나로 뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.